Welcome to the first of three in this web coding series. My name is Sean. I'll be your instructor for the next 3 weeks. And yeah, cool. So just a little preview what we're doing each week. So this week we're going to start off with just some basics with HTML. HTML is the coding language that you use to add the content to your site. It's how you add the structure. And then in the next 2 weeks, we're going to go through CSS, starting with beginner stuff, going into some more intermediate. And CSS is how you style the site's content. So that's colors, typography, layout, all of that fun stuff. So yeah, just some basics about web development, some terms you might hear as you're looking things up, as you're going around. There's a client and a server. These are both just types of computers, they're devices. And when you have code or a WordPress website, for example, all of that has to live on what's called a server. And there's actually like a physical computer somewhere where your files are being stored. Even though you don't have it with you, it's somewhere in the world when you publish it. It gets published to the server. And then when the client, and this is like a phone, this is a laptop, something that a user is using, when they go to your website, they grab the information from the server. So when you type in, google.com and you press enter, it's going and finding which server Google's code is on, and then it returns that to you so that you can see something on your screen. And then there's these concepts of domains and hosting. So hosting is basically a plan that you pay for from some sort of service. Sometimes it's free, sometimes you have to pay, most of it's going to be paid. And this is just like, how do you get your code? How do you get your site onto a server? And then the domain is going to be the actual URL that someone visits to your site. So for example, there's annenberg.usc.edu. That's a domain name. Google.com is a domain name. It's essentially whatever you're putting in that URL bar at the top of the window and clicking enter. And that's what the internet uses to go and find which server these files are hosted on, and then returns what their output is. Cool, awesome. So before we do any of the actual coding stuff, just an intro to HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Basically what that means, the hypertext means that you can have text that links to other text. So that's just linking between different pages essentially. Markup, it's similar to if you ever turned in a paper to a professor and they gave it back to you all marked up in red pen with things that they wanted to change. Markup is essentially just a way to write to tell the browser how you want certain content to be displayed. And then language is just, it's a coding language. HTML is the standard language for creating web pages. There are some other ways that you can do it, but HTML is the place to start. As I mentioned before, it describes the structure of a web page, so the order in which things show up, also when you're linking to other pages, stuff like that. And then it's typically paired with CSS for that styling, and then JavaScript, which is the programming language to add some more interactivity to your site. We're not going to cover JavaScript in this series because it is a little complicated. If we have time at the very last session, I'll show you a little bit of what you can do with it. But it is a little tough if you're new to coding. So that's why we're starting with HTML. Super basic.
It's just style.
Yes. So HTML is built on what are called elements. And I broke it down for you over here. And an element includes a starting tag and an ending tag. And this is that markup. So this is how you write and tell the browsers like Google Chrome or Safari what type of content this is. So in this example, I have the P tag, which is paragraph text. And so that's just telling every browser that's looking at this code, hey, this is paragraph text. And there's going to be a bunch of ones that we're going to learn today. In between the starting and the ending tags, that's where you put the actual content. So in this case, I put DL for Digital Lounge. So this would display some body text that just says the letters DL. And then within the starting tag, we can have attributes and values. So this is just some ways to further define some functionality in this. We'll learn what this one is later class, but there's also ones for like video. You can put the video controls there. This is where you can put like some height and width stuff. We'll learn a bunch about different attributes as well today. Cool. Any questions before we do some actual in-system coding stuff? Cool. So I will be using Visual Studio Code as my code editor. If you want to follow along with this, you can just look up Visual Studio Code, go to their website and download it. It is completely free. You can use whatever code editor you want. I know some people use Sublime Text, especially here, but I don't get access to that for free because I'm not a student, so I'm not going to show that one. I don't want to pay for it. So I'm going to do Visual Studio Code. There'll be some stuff that I'll show in here that might be a little bit different, but you should be able to follow along no matter which one you use. Cool. So once you have Visual Studio Code downloaded, if you want to open it up, you'll see something similar-ish to this. It's a pretty basic program, but I'll walk you through some stuff. The main thing that you're going to see that is different from yours to mine, if you first downloaded it, is my color scheme is a little bit different. If you want to play around with changing your color scheme, you just have to go to this code. If you're on Windows, it might be under the file menu. But where it says code, under the settings, there's our theme right here. And if I click color theme, I can see all of these different options to pick from. And the one last thing we need to do to get set up is I want us to install an extension. So in this left-hand menu, you should see this extensions button. It's like a building block, almost like Tetris. So if you click there, and then you just look up live server, you should see this one. It has like a purplish icon, and just click install. Basically what this extension does is it allows us to have essentially a mock server of if we had published this code already, so that as we are writing our code and saving it, we can see those changes happen live, and we don't have to continually go back and rerun the code. Just makes our life a little easier. Cool. You're all following along? Awesome. So last thing before we can start writing some code and learning more about HTML is let's go to our desktop or wherever you want to have a folder on your computer and just create a new folder. And I'm going to call this HTML workshop. You can call it whatever you want. Just some place that you can save all of your files. Once you have that, let's open it up in Visual Studio Code. So I'm just going to click and drag it down to my icon in my bar, and it'll open up a session with this folder, which I can see up here. It says HTML workshop right here. Another way, if the dragging and dropping, if you are struggling with that, you can do File, Open Folder, and go and find the folder on your File Explorer, your Finder. The reason that we're opening a folder instead of just starting a file from scratch is once we start to add some more content like images, once we do a CSS file next week, they all need to be linked together. And so you don't want to get in the habit of just opening the HTML file, because when you try to run it with the live server, if it can't find your other files, it's going to not work. So always open up the folder so that everything in your package is there essentially.
Drag it?
Onto the icon if you have it in your bar. Or you can go File, Open Folder, and then it just opens up your file browser. Cool. So now let's click New File, and there should be a text file option. So just choose that one. And Visual Studio Code is a code editor that's not specific to HTML, CSS. There's a bunch of different programming languages you can write in here. So where it says select a language, let's just click there and search up HTML. And then you can click there. And essentially what this is telling Visual Studio Code is we're going to be writing some HTML code. And then it's going to do some really nice things like syntax highlighting. It's going to make sure that it's detecting some errors in our code if we accidentally write something wrong. It just helps us out a little bit.
So you put new file,
Yep.
text built in.
Yep. Now let's go ahead and save this right away. So you just File, Save, and make sure that you're saving it in your folder that you created and call it index. The reason that we're going to call it index.html is when a website or a browser is going to a website, it's going to search for some file called index and use that as the home page. So this is essentially your home page. Once you create more pages, you can call them whatever you want because you're just linking to them some other way. But browsers just need to have an index.html file so that they know what to display first. And click save. And you should see it open up over here as well. Okay, now we can start coding. So the first thing that I want to show you in HTML coding is actually something that doesn't display anything on the actual website, but it's going to be helpful for us as we go back to our code so we remember what's doing what. And that's a comment. So a comment is essentially a piece of code that doesn't get rendered by the browser. It is visible in some ways if you know how to look at a site's code, which I will show you later. So don't put anything kind of crazy in there or mean or anything. I always just put like some helpful hints to myself of like, hey, this is what this is doing. If I like go back and forget, or if you're working with multiple different people and you want to make sure that you have a note on there so that they can know what it is. To write a comment in HTML, you do the opening bracket, which is like the little sideways thing, an exclamation point, and then 2 hyphens. So I'll do that again. So you do the opening caret, an exclamation point, and 2 hyphens. Now, what's really nice is Visual Studio Code adds that second part for us, which is 2 more hyphens and that closing caret. So now anything we write in here will not actually be rendered by the browser. So this is not going to show up on like Google Chrome if you go to a website. And so I'm just going to write here like document setup, just so I know that this is where I'm going to write my document setup code. You can put whatever you want here. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. Yeah, so on the welcome page, there's this button, new file, and then text file. And then I just selected a language and I did HTML. You're welcome. All right, and I'm just going to Command S, Control S, and that just saves it. I just get in the habit of saving all the time. All right. So just like other software that you might use, like Photoshop or Word or Google Docs, code gets updated, actually, and how you write code. So we are currently on version 5 of HTML, and you can write HTML4 code, HTML3 code if you want. It's pretty outdated, but because there's multiple versions, we need to tell the browsers what version of HTML that we're using. And that's how to do that, we do what's called a doc type declaration. So again, we do our opening caret and an exclamation point, and then in all caps, we put doc type. So DOCTYPE, a space, and then HTML in all lowercase, and then our closing. So this is our doc type declaration. This is telling Google Chrome, this is telling Safari, hey, we are coding in HTML5, the most updated version of HTML. If you decide to learn previous versions and want to write in that, the declaration is a little bit more complicated, but we're not going to show that. You'll probably just use 5 until it's updated. Then I'm going to press enter to go to a new line, and I'm going to add another tag. So our opening caret, and then in all lowercase, just HTML, and close it off with our closing caret. Now, you'll see that Visual Studio Code automatically added our end tag here. So what's really nice about using a code editor like this is it will automatically detect which of these need end tags, and it just adds it for you so you don't have to remember to do it. But just for reference, if you ever need to write an end tag by yourself, it's just this / and then the same letters as the start tag was. What this tag is, this HTML one, this is our container for all of our code. And so now in between these 2 tags, we're going to write all of the rest of our page code. Okay. And we're going to press enter. And you'll notice that it's automatically indented for me right here. That is something that doesn't need to happen. If I were to go like this, it's totally fine to start writing some more code. Most people just do indentation to show what's contained within what, and also it just makes it a little bit easier to read. So to do all of that, I just did opening caret, HTML, closing, It automatically added that, and I just pressed enter. Now we have two sections that we want to create in our page. The first one, you do the opening caret and then the word head, so HEAD, and then close it off with that closing. This is the head section. This is also known as the metadata section. So most of the stuff that we're going to write in here actually isn't going to get displayed, but it's going to be stuff like we're defining the browser tab name and icon. We can do that here. This is where we'll link to our CSS code. This is where you can add like SEO keywords, stuff like that, just things that aren't the main page content, but are important for a site. I'm going to move my cursor to the very end of this line and press enter again. And the next section, let's do the same thing, but instead of head, we're going to do body. Our body section is the main one, and this is where we're going to write all of our code that shows up on the site. So our text, our images, all the fun things that we'll do there.
I had the same as WordPress, like heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and you tell your title where to go.
No, so the head section is the metadata section. So this is stuff that doesn't actually show up on your site. You would write those headings in the body section, which we'll do in a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to place my cursor back in between my head section. So in between the starting tag and the closing tag up here, and I'm going to press enter. And for now, I'm only going to do one tag with you, and that's going to be our title. So I'm going to do opening caret and then title, and then close it off. And this is going to be the name that shows up on the browser tab. So as you're like adding new tabs onto and opening new websites, you'll know that they all have like a name up there. This is where you define what that name is. So I'm just going to write HTML workshop in here. You can write whatever you want. Now I'm going to Command S, and I'm going to show you this live server extension. So near the bottom of your Visual Studio Code, you should see a button called Go Live if you install that live server extension. And when you click it, it is going to start running and open up a new tab. And it's going, this is our website. This is what we're coding. This is what we're creating. And you'll see that I have my HTML workshop because I wrote it in my title. So here you can write whatever you want. If you want to change this, so basically the URL, that's a domain, which you would have to buy from like GoDaddy or Bluehost or some domain provider. All right. So jumping back to Visual Studio Code, let's place our cursor in between our body and enter. And we're going to start off with our text-based elements. So just some basic stuff to write some text. So let's start off creating some headings. So headings in HTML and web design can be from level 1 to level 6. And 1 is going to be your most important. It's going to be the biggest one. It is normally your page title. And then 6 is the least important one. It's like sub in subsection, 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 etc. You can think of this as like your H1 is like your book title. Your H2 is going to be like a chapter title. Your H3 would be if there's like a subchapter or something like that. And so it just kind of nests within each other. So let's start by adding our H1. So how to do that is you just do the opening caret, type in H1, and then close it. And in between these, whatever text you write will be our page title. And again, I'm just going to put HTML workshop, but you can put whatever you want. And now if I Command S and I go back to my browser where my live server is, I'll see that it now shows up on my website. You can have as many headings as you would like on each page, except for your H1. So that most important one, the H1 heading one, you can only have one per page. That's because it's your page title. So let's go back. After our heading 1, let's press enter, and let's see what these other headings look like. So now let's do our opening and do H2 and close it. And let's say we're going to do like a portfolio website. You might have like an about section, a project section, all of that. So I want to put those titles here in my H2s. So for the first one, I'm going to do about. Afterwards, I am going to click at the very end of this line, enter again, do another H2 and do projects. And let's add one more for contact. And if I command save that, so command S, I can now see that my H2s are showing up here. With our HTML code, Google Chrome will have some default styling applied to it. So, next week we'll customize it a little bit more. But this way you can still see that there's some sort of styling, like the H1 is bigger than the H2. And maybe under projects, I want to have multiple different headings for my different project names. So I'm going to do an H3, let's say, and project 1 name is going to be my text. I'm going to do a project 2 name, and I'm going to do a project 3 name. So under my heading for my projects, I now have an H3 or our heading 3 that's going to say each of our project names. In this case, I'm just putting some placeholder content. And if I command S and I go back, I can see that I'm adding even more structure to my site. My H1 is the biggest, the most important is my page title. My H2 is the second most important is my section titles. And then my H3 is my third most important, and so on and so forth. So now let's do some paragraph text, our body text. So underneath our about, so go to the very end of that line, and I'm gonna press enter. To add body text, you just use the P tag. So the opening, caret, P, closing caret. And then in here, this is where you put your paragraph text, your body text, whatever you want to call it. So this is like an about section. So I would maybe say like this about, like this is the HTML workshop of the web coding series. Again, you can put whatever you want here. And I'm going to command S to save. And when I go back, I can see I now have my body text available here. The last thing I want to show is, let's say you have a really long piece of text that you want there to be a line break for. What you can do is you can place this anywhere in your HTML, and it's going to add a horizontal line that doesn't show like actually anything. So I'm going to just put it in the middle of my paragraph text just to show you. So if I do an opening caret BR and then close it, that's what's called a break. And so if I save it, I can see that my paragraph is now cut where I put that BR. This one is one of our first self-closing tags. So this one doesn't need that ending tag over here. And as it doesn't, Visual Studio Code didn't add it for me. How are we doing, sir? Yes, so you have to have the live server extension installed. So you would go to extensions, find live server, and install it. And then once you've done that, there should be a go live button on your bottom right. Right now, it's just telling me the port number because I have one open already.
Sometimes it like appears and disappears, right?
Yeah.
I get that same like port number.
Yeah. All right. So the next thing I want to show you is how do we link to something else. So the main thing about HTML is it's hypertext. You can link to other places. So I'm going to go over here to my Explorer in Visual Studio Code, and I'll have this button right here. It's like a piece of paper with a plus icon, and that's how you can add a new file to our folder. So I'm just going to call this link.html and press enter on it. And if I go to my Finder and I open it up, you'll see that it created that new file there as well. So I just went to Explorer in Visual Studio Code, hit this new file icon, and then typed in the name that I wanted for it, and then pressed enter. So in our new one, I want to show you a little bit of a trick that Visual Studio Code has, which is really nice. Because before, we added this doc type declaration, this HTML, this head section, this body section, and you would have to do this for every single page that you create. With Visual Studio Code, they have a really nice shortcut where if you put an exclamation point in an HTML document and you press enter, it's just going to populate all of that for you. There's some stuff we haven't gone through, like this attribute is the first one. So in our HTML tag, you can add the lang attribute, so LANG, and set it equal to a language code. So if you're going to have different pages in different languages, this is just how do you specify and tell browsers what language your website is written in. And then we have these meta ones. We won't go too deep into these. These are just metadata, essentially. This first one, this character set, is that there's a bunch of different characters out there, different sets. The standard one is this UTF-8. And this again is just telling browsers, these are the characters that you should be showing. And this next one is for, it looks at the user's screen and says, hey, display my website to their device width. So if they're looking at it from a computer, like a desktop, or from a phone, it's just saying, hey, look at how wide their device is, and then try to adjust my website to look a little bit better on those devices. In the third workshop, we're going to go through how you can write all of the custom part of that, so you can customize your experience across different screens. So for now, in this new file, in the body, let's just add some sort of content so we can know that this is working. So I'm just going to add another H1 and call it my link page. And I'm just going to save that. Yes, you put a exclamation point and you enter. Okay. All right. So now that I have my second page set up a little bit, let's go back to our index.html, our main file. And under projects, let's do under our project one name, we're going to add a link to this other page. And we do that with the A tag. A stands for anchor, which is just like the link essentially. And then in between our A tags, this is the text that you want to show as the link. So in this case, I'm going to say, just like, let's say, click here for link page. And I'm just going to save that. And when I go back here, I can see that that text is added, but it's not actually active yet. And that's because we have to specify where it needs to link to. And how you do that is we're going to write our first attribute from scratch. So if you put your cursor in between the A and the closing caret of the start tag, put a space. And the first attribute we're going to use is called the href, or the hyperlink reference. So you just type in href and you set it equals, and then it should add some quotation marks for you by default. And then whatever you put within these quotation marks, that link, this is where it's going to point towards. So you could put, let's say, www.google.com. And if we save and we go back to our live server and we click on that page, I put it in a little bit wrong. So let's just do what's called I'm just going to go to Google and copy, and let's see with the HTTP if it works. It does. Okay. So easiest way is just to go and copy this from the website that you're going to do, just to make sure that you're not doing any typos like I did. I forgot something. So you can just go here, copy and paste it. This file path, this https://google.com is called an absolute URL. And what that means is essentially it's the entire piece of the URL. So if I were to go, let's say, to the Annenberg website, and I go to the academics tab, the undergraduate majors, and I click in here or double click, this entire thing is our absolute path. It just essentially is like bare bones. We're telling you exactly where you need to go. However, there is also a really nice way that you can do it when you are doing all of your stuff from yourself. So when you're making all your pages, when you've been uploading your own images, and that's through what's called a relative file path. And a relative file path, instead of it being the exact domain where something is located, is just saying, hey, take a look at where our current file is located, and then using the path that we provided, kind of navigate through a structure to find it. So I will show you what that looks like, because I know it's a little confusing. So I'm going to delete the Google one. So I want to go to this link page. So I'm going to put a period in between my quotations. And this is essentially saying, hey, take a look at whatever folder my index.html file is in and start there. And then put a forward slash. And here's also a really nice thing about Visual Studio Code is now it knows, hey, we are in our HTML workshop folder. here's the content that you have within it. So I can click on my link.html or I can type it out, but I'm just going to click it. So if I Command S, if I save and I go back to my live server, now when I click on my link, it's going to take me to that other page that I created, my link page. So again, excuse me, how I did that was I put a period to say, look in the folder that our current file is located in, and then a forward slash to open up the rest of that folder. And then I could see that I have my link.html. Sound good? Cool. So now I want to show you one last little neat trick with these links. And that is going to be, how can we link to something within the same page? So how do we click on a button and it scrolls us down to where that part of the page is? And so how you can do that is if you go to this href, and we are going to add, instead of this link, we are going to add something else here. But first, we have to define where it's going to go. So let's say I wanted to go to this contact section. So I'm going to go to my H2 for my contact, go in between the two and that closing, and I'm going to add an attribute here. So I'm going to put space, and I'm going to put ID equals, and then in between these quotation marks, I'm just going to write whatever word I want to use to identify this content. So in this case, I can just put contact hyphen section. You can put whatever you want though. Now, back up in my link, in that href, I can now put that name that I put in here after the pound symbol or like the hashtag. And if I were to put contact section, in coding, it's really important to spell everything correctly. And let's save it. Now, if I go back here and I click, because I don't have enough content here, it doesn't actually scroll me, but I can see up here, it's going to that section. So I'm just going to quickly put in like a bunch of placeholder text. So I'm just going to look up a lorem ipsum generator just to show this to you. Let's generate 20 paragraphs. And I'm going to copy that. I'm going to place that in my paragraph. So now when I'm going to refresh real quick. When I click here for link page, it's going to scroll me down to that section just because there's enough content there. Does that make sense? Yes. I am going to delete these paragraphs. So for the actual link, you have to add the, oh, do not want the dictionary. You have to specify where it's going. So you do that with the ID attribute where you want it to be. So in this case, H2, ID equals contact section. And then back in your link, you put the pound symbol and then just that same name that you put down here.
We also need to update it in the href, right? The href.
Yes, cool. So our website's getting there. It's a little boring. It's a little bland. We want to add some images, more visual content to it. You can play around with any image, video, audio file that you have yourself. If you want to use the exact ones that I am using, you can type in that URL on the whiteboard into your browser, and that should take you to where I uploaded them on Google Drive. And I just zipped them all together. You can download that file, open it up, and you should have the folder of all the assets that I'm about to start using. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly grab this assets folder and I'm going to move it over to this one that we're going to work with. And again, if you want to use the same exact ones, you just go to that URL on the whiteboard and you should be able to download the folder. And I have a piece of audio, this PDF document, I have some images, some logo stuff, and a video. You can also use whatever you have on your computer available to you. But make sure that they are within the same folder that you're going to be working with here. So I'm going to create a new section underneath here. I'm going to call it H2, and I'm just going to call it media, just so that we can see all of our media tags all put together. So let's start off with our image. So with an image, the tag is IMG. So it's basically image without the A and the E. And then I'm just going to close it off right now. And you'll notice it doesn't actually add anything to the end. And that's because the image tag is actually one of those self-closing ones where you don't need that closing tag. And where you're going to do all of your work is right here in our starting tag. So put a space after the G and in between the closing caret. We're going to do a bunch of attributes here. And the first one is going to be the actual image file. So it's very similar to our href one, but this time it's a source. So we're actually grabbing something from somewhere else, not pushing to something else, if that makes sense. Whereas here, we were clicking on a link trying to go somewhere, and here we're actually trying to pull some content from somewhere else. So instead of the href, we're going to do the source attribute, which is src. It works very similarly to our href one. Now we just have to do a file path to get to our actual image. So I'm going to put my period / to say, hey, look in the folder that my index.html file is in. Now I added my assets folder to this as well. So when I click on assets, I have all of these subfolders. I can click on images, and then I can put whatever image I want here. So I'm just going to do this project 3 image. So with these file paths, we did very basic ones before where everything was in that same folder. But if you're organizing it with subfolders, you just have to keep doing / the name of the folder, / name of the folder, and so on. So now if I save and I go back to my website, my image now loads. It is a huge image, but I will show you how you can change that. So again, to add the image, we have the img tag with the source or the src attribute set equal to the file path to get to that image. Now, I want to change the size. There's ways that you can do this in CSS, which is generally my preferred method, which I'll show you next week. But just so that we don't have to stare at this super huge image for this workshop, I'll show you the attributes that you can use here. They're super simple. It's height and it's width. So let's start off with the height. So you just type in HEIGHT equals, and then in between these quotations, you just put the pixel number that you want to have your image size. So maybe I want my image to be like 1080, let's say. I'm going to move outside of here and add the width as well. And I'm going to set that to 1920. You can set them to whatever you want to see how it looks. But to change the size, I put height equals 1080 and width equals 1920. And when I save and I go back, it's still pretty big. It's a pretty big size. You can play around with those numbers to get to what you would like, but it's not as big as it was before. Cool. So the next thing that we're going to do, if we're all good with images so far, is we're going to work with a video. So let's just create a new line. Let's do our opening. And very similar to image, it's very close, but it's actually the word just video. Now, if I do the closing, you'll notice that it does add an end tag here, this ending of the video. And that is because nowadays all browsers do support the video tag. Previously, they did not. So there was some times where like a website would have a video, but it just wouldn't work. So in the event that you want to, accommodate those who are maybe still behind on their browser versions and they're like maybe a decade old or something, you can put some text in here to show if their browser doesn't support a video. So I would just be kind of blunt and say your browser doesn't support video. Nowadays, it's probably safe that you don't have to write anything in here because most people are on a browser that can show videos. But if you want to be extra careful, you can put that right here. Now let's actually get our video in here. And so very similar to the image, we go into that starting tag, do src equals, and then we do that file path to our video. So I'm going to do that period / I'm going to click on assets, my video folder, and then I just named it video.mp4. So now if I save and I go back to my website, I can see that there's this black box right here. This is where my video actually is, but there's two things that are happening that are showing that it's not actually playing. One is we don't have it set to autoplay, so it's not actually going to play by default, which is actually the preferred method on the web. Kind of autoplay videos are a little annoying, as we all probably know. But we also haven't specified that we want to see the video play controls at all either. So let's start by doing that. So after our URL in our video, let's add another attribute and just type in controls. And when I save and I go back to my website, I can now see my video player controls here. And when I click play, my video should play. You can also do a very similar thing with the sizing. You can also put a height and a weight. So I'm just going to do the same numbers for this one as well, just to show you. And I can save and I go back and now my video is bigger and it's still playing. Now, there is 3 more attributes I want to show you with this video tag. The first one is if you did want it to autoplay, you just type in autoplay. And so if I save this, it's already playing. I didn't even have to click press play or anything like that. Another one is loop. So if I type in loop, L-O-O-P, and I save and I go back, if I go to the very end of my video and play, once it reaches the end of my video, it's just going to restart from the beginning and keep playing. If I did not put that loop attribute in there, it would not replay the video. Okay, cool. 2 more. So let's say you did want to autoplay from the beginning. You wanted it to show up, but you still want to be a little courteous to those who aren't expecting a loud video to play right away. You can type in muted, M-U-T-E-D. And now when I save that, my video still autoplays, but it starts off muted. So I don't actually have to worry about it being super loud. If I'm just going to take the width down so we can see the end, I can still control my volume though, because I put that controls attribute there. So I put the controls right here, which means that I have my video play controls. So even if I do autoplay or muted or stuff, I can still change stuff, make it stop. I can change the volume, all of that stuff. Cool. Okay, I have one last one to show you in this video. And that is maybe you want there to be a cover image, because right now if I were to take off autoplay and let's say I save this and I go back, it's just showing this black screen, which isn't very enticing as, a video. It's not even showing me the start of my video, but I can set basically like a thumbnail to show before the video starts playing. This will show up if you do have autoplay put on. This will show up as long as your video is still loading. But if you don't have autoplay on, this will show until the person clicks play. And it is called a poster. So P-O-S-T-E-R. And just like all of our other files, we do equals. And then in between those quotation marks, we just go to that image that we want to do. So again, my period / I'm going to assets, images. Let's just pick this project 3 image again. It's going to be super big. So if I save and I go back, well, actually it's not because I set my height and width. But now this image is going to show until someone clicks play. So if you like designing thumbnails for videos and you want them on your website, you can totally do that. Okay, so the video one had a lot of attributes that we went through. Does anyone have questions so far? Cool. So let's get to the next one, which is the audio. So if you have like an audio only thing and you don't want the video player to show up, there is also an audio player. So it is the same exact thing as your video, but you just use the word audio instead of video. And again, you can put text in between just in case if their browser doesn't support audio. To add our audio file, we do the same exact thing. We add the attribute of src equals, and then we do the file path to our audio. And again, here we want to add controls to make sure that we can control playing that audio. So if I save and I go back, I now have an audio player here. And when I click play, it's going to play the audio file. So same exact thing as our video, but just using the audio tag instead of our video tag. You can also use the same other attributes You can do the muted if you wanted to start off playing as muted. You can do the autoplay if you want it to autoplay when the page loads. You can also do loop if you want the audio file to loop after it ends. Cool. So there is one last kind of media type of thing I want to show you, and that is going to be how can we embed like another web page or a PDF document or something like that into our website. So I'm going to do it with a PDF document. So I'm going to create a new line, and this time let's use a different tag, and it's called the iframe. So iframe. And here we do the same exact thing with all of the other ones, is we put our source, our src equal to the file path to get to our file. So in this case, if you're using the ones that I have, it's under the documents file or folder, and then just this presentation. And then make sure that you're closing it off because it does need our closing tag here. So now when I save, I can see it is down here. It's a little small, but I can change the size if I would like as well. So I could do a new heights, let's say, and a new width. And then now my PDF document is a little bit bigger. And I can zoom in so I can still see the stuff. But yeah, that's how you put a PDF into a website. Now, something you might be noticing is as we added those elements, it added them side by side, right? This is something we'll talk about next week, but just like a little preview, every element by default is either what is called block or inline. So block elements are like our paragraph element up here, our heading ones, which means by default, content doesn't stack horizontally. So when we created the element of our heading, and then we went down here to our next heading and our paragraph, these are all block level elements, which means that even if there is additional space on the side, they're not going to add the next HTML element there. Some are inline, which is different. And that is if there is space to fit it to the side of the content, they will. We can change this and we'll do that next week. Cool. Two last tags to show you, and then I'll go through some more kind of best practices and organization in our actual HTML file. So this next one that we're going to do is going to be our button. So very similar to our link, we can have a button that just displays by default. It's a super simple tag because it's just called button. And we can call it, let's just say contact for now. And if I were to just save this and I go back here, I can see that I have my contact button showing up. And again, this is one of those inline ones. Everything else is super big. You can customize how this looks. And again, we'll do stuff like that next week. Now, if you wanted the button to actually go somewhere, that's a little bit of a different story because you also need to add like that link element. So we could go in between here and say, we want this contact to be in between our A, starting and closing tags. So what this does is it creates our button, and then it says the contents within our button are going to be a link that is going to take us somewhere else. And then we have our text. So if I were to make my href, remember that our anchor, our link has our href instead of our source. And we do that to, let's say, our link page. Now our button does have the same functionality that that link did before because we added that A element, that link, so that it can still do something. Cool. I lied before. I forgot another tag that we're going to do. So we have two more types of tags that we're going to still learn. The first one that we're going to do is going to be lists. So there are two types of lists in HTML. There's ordered lists and there are unordered lists. An ordered list, basically the order of the items within matter. So this would be like steps to get to class from where you are right now. Like it would be exit 301D, exit the digital lounge, go down the stairs. You have to do those in order, or like a recipe, for example, too. An unordered list doesn't really matter the order. So this could be your grocery list. It could just be like you need to buy milk, eggs, bread. Doesn't matter what order you get them at the grocery store, except you should probably not get your meat first so it doesn't get all warm. But that's the difference. So to create them, we use the UL or the OL tags. So for our unordered list, which is going to display as bullet points, we create UL as our container. So this is going to be all of the things that we want to put in our bulleted list. So in between our two tags, I'm going to press enter so that I can have a little bit more visual about what I'm adding here. Now to add each individual item in your list, you use the list item tag, which is LI. And now every one of these that we add is going to be an extra piece of our list. So I'm going to put one for about, one for projects, one for contacts, and one for media. You're probably already getting a sense of an idea of where you can use this, a navigation menu. So now when I save this and I go back to my index section, I think I might have to relaunch. I can see all the way down here, I have my list. Because I created this as a unordered list, it's going to show as bullets. But if I go back here, I'm going to just copy and paste this. So I just copied and pasted my list code, and I'm going to change this U to O and this U down here to an O as well. So now I have my UL list and my OL list, and the OL is going to be our ordered, and that's going to be numbers. Something that I will show you next week is, for example, with this as a navigation menu, we probably don't want those bullets there. We just want them to be in a list. There is a way that you can remove them, which I will show you next week. Okay, now our last one. And the last one that I'm going to show, I don't typically use a ton of just based on the types of stuff that I'm creating. But if you work for, let's say, a company and you're doing their website and they're going to have a pricing table, for example, of all of their different plans and how what's included and how much each costs, that's probably going to be in a table format. So I'm just going to show you real quick how you can create a table. It's super simple. You start off with the table tag. And this is our container for the rest of our table. So you can have different sections of a table. You can have like a header row, for example. You can have the body parts. And it's very similar to how we did with the other pieces of our document. But instead of it being the head and the body, it's the T head and the T body. And that just basically means our table header and our table body. So now I'm going to stick within my body one, and I'm going to press enter again, just so I can see it a little bit better. And to create a row, you use the TR tag. So this creates a row in our table. And to add elements in our row, I'm going to press enter again. And you add table data, so TD. And I'm just going to put, let's say, first table data. And then after, I'm going to go to this end of our line. I'm going to add another table data element within our row. This is how we create another column. So I'm going to say second table data. Before we look at what it looks like, we're going to do our header. So I'm going to go in between my T head and my closing T head, enter again. I'm going to do another TR to create that row. Instead of the table data, we're going to do our table header, which is TH. So I'm going to say TH first column. I'm going to add another one that says second column. And now when I save that and I go, I have the bare bones of a table getting started. And again, with the CSS, that's how you design how your table looks. So that's a crash course on a table. Use the table tag to encapsulate everything, the T head to be our table header, the T body to be our body data, a TR for our rows, TH for our table headings, and TD for our table data. Cool. Any questions before we make our code look a little bit better? Cool. So now what we're going to do for the remainder of today is we're going to clean up our code a little bit, show you some more best practices for how to do stuff. So the very first thing that we are going to do is we're going to use what's called the div tag or the divider, division, something like that. But basically what this does is it creates a section that we can group content within. So let's say I had this about section, right? So I have my about title, and then I have my about text right here. Maybe I want to make sure that this content is grouped together. And this is also going to help us with some styling next week. We can put them within the div. So right before our H2 for our about, I'm going to do the opening caret, div, and close it. And you'll notice that it gives me that closing one right here. But if I cut it out and I paste it after the content, now it's going to group my H2 and my paragraph text together in a section. This doesn't change the visual at all. So if I were to save this and I were to go back here, it still looks the exact same as before. But now with this, I can easily add stuff of like an ID to say this is our about section. And then now I can jump to here instead. Once we style stuff next week and we do some more formatting, it's going to be easier. But so we have this div to create groups of our content. And you'll notice that I'm doing this indentation a lot. This is, we're nesting our elements. So our very first one that we did was with our HTML tag. If I were to click on this downward caret in Visual Studio Code, you'll notice that all of my code goes away. And that's because it's all contained within our HTML tags. And this is how you start creating that structure of your site. Not only does it create the structure, but it also makes it a lot easier to read than having everything on this same line. So we did that also down here. So our list elements are contained within our list, for example. There is one downside to divs, and that is for users who are low or no vision, and they're using what's called a screen reader. So a screen reader is a software that when enabled, it will read out the website content for those who struggle or can't actually see it. With a div, a screen reader doesn't know that that is really related or doesn't know why it's related. So there's this concept called semantic HTML, which allows us to write our code in such a way that makes it easier for those screen readers to understand what our content is. And so the first one is very similar to our head tag up here, but it's a header. So if you go to the end of your starting body tag, mine is on line 7, and I press enter, and I am going to do my opening caret and type in header. I am going to cut this closing one. So Command X, Control X. And then my header is going to be after, let's say, my about section. And I'm going to paste it in there. And then I am going to move all of this content over by one indentation. So how I did that is I just highlighted all of the content and then I pressed tab and then it just moves it all over one tab each. So now we have this header tag, which is telling those screen readers, hey, this is our header content. It's starting this page. You'll notice as I hover over div, even Visual Studio Code has no special meaning at all. It's also nice for us because looking at this code, seeing header is a lot more descriptive than seeing div.
For div is to group.
Yeah. The next one for this semantic stuff is the main section. So your main piece of your page. And it's just the main tag. So MAIN. And maybe I want to put all of my things through my button into my main section. And so I can do that like so. So this main section is telling the screen readers, this is the main content of this web page. It's the most important for users to go through. It also tells us that when we look back at our code.
This is also make it more readable.
more readable, and then also to assist with screen readers. Yeah. The last one that we're going to do is our footer. And so we're going to do footer, and we're just going to put the rest of our content in our footer, let's say. It's a little random with the content that we're putting in what, but so I put the lists and our table in our footer. Yes, to move all of the lines at once, you just highlight all of the content. And then if you want to like tab in once, you can just click the tab button on your keyboard. All right. So we worked a little bit with this ID section before when we were doing the links to a place within the same document. This is essentially just an identifier. This is us putting some arbitrary word to identify what content this is, but it can only work for one element at a time. So I couldn't have, about section also ID'd right here because the ID is to identify one single piece of content. But you might want to kind of tell the code that a lot of things are related to each other, and you might want to style them similarly, but they might not be the same tag right here. So maybe I want this text, let's say, this paragraph text, and this H3, our project 3 name, I'm going to style them in similar ways. We're not going to do that, but just as an example. How you can group them without having to like rearrange and mess up your structure is to add the class attribute. So in this case, I'm going to do this text. I'm going to say p class equals, I'm just going to type in design. You can put in whatever you want to do. And I'm going to go down here and do the same for some other element. So now what this allows us to do, which we're going to play around with next week, is to style both this heading and that paragraph text the same without having to duplicate code later on. So this is just another way to kind of group some stuff together. I found the most useful case for this is going to be for designing. Cool. So another concept that is important for the screen readers, because obviously they struggle with images, they struggle with video. A screen reader can't look at an image and then accurately describe what it is, at least not yet. AI is going some places. But we can define what that screen reader should read aloud. So if we were to go back to our image, let's say right here, I can add another attribute. So I'm going to go to the end of my image tag, and I'm going to put alt equals, and then I'm going to write some text that describes what that image is. So that image, I believe, was like a mountain scene with like a sunset happening. So I could say like a sunset happening over a mountain. So now when those screen readers get to that image, instead of not being able to say anything, it's going to read aloud that text that we provided. This is important if you're going to be putting like images that have kind of important information to what you're writing. You'll also want to kind of summarize that in your alt attribute. The thing that is also really nice with this is if you are interested in creating a website that gets a lot of traffic, Google and other search engines, they also can't look at the content of an image and then accurately match it to what someone is searching. And so by providing this alt attribute, Google and Bing and Yahoo can all still read what that image is and still potentially match your web page with what someone is searching.
You can read videos either, right? So you have to describe.
Yes. Yeah. So same with the video. You would just go down here, alt equals. This was the video of a small turtle swimming in the ocean.
Browser doesn't support audio. That's like an error message that will say.
If someone's using like a really old browser for some reason, and that browser version just doesn't support this audio tag, that's what we'll show instead.
What the two?
That's just where it goes. Yeah, cool. So that's pretty much the basics of HTML and what you can do with it. There's obviously some more that I did not cover. And as you can tell from this, it's not styled beautifully. But that's what we're going to work on starting next week, is adding that CSS where we can actually customize the fonts and the sizes and the colors and the positioning. Does anyone have any last questions about HTML at all?
So I understand this is to group the codes, but is that just for organizational purposes?
It's organizational and it's easier to style them together. I've we're gonna do like an example. Let me pull it open so that you can see what we're working towards. So we're working towards something like this, and these cards, for example, are an image, it's text, it's this shape, it's a button. But in order to position them, it's a lot easier to do it. Don't mind this, I was messing around with it. We won't be doing that. But this is a lot easier to style when they're grouped together, right? Because then I don't have to when I'm trying to place everything, I don't have to place the image, the text, the background, and the button every time. I can just group them all together and move them around like that.
So every effect that you do is gonna affect all of them.
Yes. Let me reopen. Cool. So one last little thing I'll show you. It's gonna look very scary. I'm gonna warn you. But with images, if you open up the images thing, if you're using mine, but also just in general, there's a bunch of different types of image file extensions. So under logos, for example, I have PNG. This is going to be the one that you're going to want to use if you want there to be some sort of transparent background. JPEGs, on the other hand, don't support transparency. So even if your JPEG file size was, let's say, 12 by 12, but the actual image was only like 4 by 4, it's still going to have like 8, pixels of like white space around. So if you wanted it to be transparent, you use PNG. If it doesn't really matter, I use JPEG. But there's this last one called SVG, and this is scalable vector graphics. So if you are a designer and you design in Illustrator, for example, you probably work with vectors a lot. Vectors work differently than our JPEGs and PNGs. Our JPEGs and PNGs are pixel-based, which is called like a raster image. So that's basically like tiny little squares that all have one color to them. And when you put them all together, it makes this image. When you blow these up to sizes that are much bigger than the original thing, it gets really blurry. Vectors are built on lines and shapes instead. And so with these, when you resize them, they don't lose any of their quality. So I designed these two buttons in Illustrator and I exported them as SVG files. So I didn't do any coding. But if I open them up in Visual Studio Code, you can see that it's actually code that makes this scalable vector graphic, right? The reason why this is really cool is because you can start animating it as well with some code. So with CSS, you can animate elements, especially these SVG ones. So if you're going to be creating some kind of cool designs that you want to animate in some ways, if you go to the point of learning JavaScript, you could animate it based on like a user interaction or a user input. I would do SVGs. Cool?
And you export
From Illustrator. Yeah. Yeah. Which is really nice because then you don't have to learn how to do this. Cool. So that's what we're covering today. Next week, we'll start off with the basics of CSS so we can do some styling of our website.